Hello, good morning. You are watching your own news channel, AFK Newsroom, and this is your host, Dr. Ajaz Ahmed. And in today's analytical report, we are going to discuss uh, political updates on the international landscape as is in Switzerland and it is America's high stakes bets on Iran these days as for the very first time in the modern history of American diplomacy, a sitting United States vice president sat in the same room as senior Iranian officials, not to issue um, ultimatums through intermediaries, not in a back channel conference call, but face to face at the Bergenstock Resort in Switzerland, in an encounter that could reshape the geopolitics of the entire Middle East. And tonight we break down everything you need to know, what happened, what it means, and what comes next. Here are four points, four questions driving tonight's analysis. First one is: did Vice President Vance achieve a breakthrough, or is this summit already teetering or collapse? Secondly, can a nuclear deal survive an Israeli military campaign that neither Washington nor Tehran controls? Thirdly, what does the Strait of Hormuz tell us about Iran's negotiating leverage? Fourthly, and finally, and is President Trump helping or torpedoing his own vice president from 5,000 miles away? So, uh, to understand today, you have to understand the last 4 months' activities. On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched coordinated military campaign and military strikes on Iranian territory. Attacks that triggered the most acute threat of a full regional war the Middle East has seen in decades. Oil prices spiked. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 21 miles choke point through which roughly one fifth of the all globally traded oil flows, was closed by Iran for weeks. And Strait of Hormuz, the 20% of world's oil supply, uh, uh, which was closed by Iranian officials and Iranian forces for weeks, was left a very deep impacts on the economy of international countries and international boundaries. If I say, the economic consequences were immediate and severe. American motorists saw prices at the pump spike ahead of peak summer travel season. Financial markets braced, and the Trump White House faced a stark choice: escalate or negotiate, and they choose to negotiate. At this week, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the United States and Iran, a very fragile step that set in motion a 60 days window for the two countries to hammer out a comprehensive deal. So what's on the table in those 60 days? The very first point is nuclear program. Secondly, on a Strait of Hormuz. Third, sanction reliefs demanded by Iranian government, and fourth is regional ceasefire. So, very first on the very first step, we need to know about nuclear program of Iran. Iran would agree to curb uranium enrichment, a program Washington views as a pathway to a bomb. Tehran insists the program is peaceful and has been defiant. Iranian President Pezeshkian said Sunday that Iran will, quote, never back down from the right to enrich uranium. Secondly, Strait of Hormuz, a permanent guarantee of free commercial passage through the waterway, the economic juggler of global energy markets. Thirdly, sanction reliefs. Iran wants international sanctions uh, lifted and access to billions in frozen assets. Immediate partial relief, including sanctions waivers on its energy sector, is on the agenda. And finally, regional ceasefire. The fighting between Israel and Iran. The fighting between Israel and Iran begged Hezbollah in Lebanon must stop. This is Iran's central demand and the most explosive variable in the talks. President Trump, for his part, said he agreed to last week's memorandum of understanding specifically to avert what he described as a potential global economic depression triggered by high oil prices. Markets responded almost immediately. Oil futures dropped by uh, dropped nearly 8% in the days after the agreement was announced, and the economic stakes could not be higher. So let's go inside the room and discuss what is happening and at between JD Vance and Iranian officials at Bergenstock, Bergenstock City. Vice President JD Vance arrived at Amman Air Base outside Lausanne in the early hours of Sunday morning. He was joined by two key figures, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who had already been on the ground in Switzerland for days, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who has quietly become one of the most consequential behind the scenes figures in this diplomatic push. Witkoff and Kushner had begun the heavy lifting before Vance even landed, sifting through the technical details of the nuclear framework, trying to identify where there was common ground and where the fault lines lay. Format. What is the format on a quadrilateral meeting? About discussing the format of quadrilateral meeting, that is, the U.S. and Iran did not sit down alone. The talks involved two critical mediators, Pakistan, and whose Prime Minister Mr. Shehbaz Sharif played a pivotal role, and Qatar, whose Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani provided crucial neutral ground and logistical infrastructure, including the resort itself, which is Qatari owned. The International Atomic Energy Agency chief Rafael Grossi was also in attendance, a significant signal that nuclear verification and inspection protocols were already being discussed. Now, here's what you need to notice about those opening moments. The Iranian delegation, led by Parliament Speaker Muhammad Bakir Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, did not appear alongside Vance for the photo opportunity. They did not stand in front of cameras with the U.S. side. Araghchi walked into the room and embraced Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif, but did not publicly interact with Vance. Al Jazeera diplomatic correspondent James Bayes, reporting from Stock, called this a clear indicator of, quote, how tense things are. This is not just optics. In diplomacy, the optics are the message Iran signaled to its domestic audience and to the region that it is not giving Washington a propaganda victory with smiling handshakes before the hard work is done. So, what did Vance say? The question is, what did Vance say in his public remarks? Vance was measured, forward looking, and deliberately optimistic. He thanked the Pakistani and Qatari leaders for their mediation and said President Trump had, quote, asked us to turn over a new leaf to transform our relationship with the people of Iran. The question before us now is how much more can we accomplish together? Can we turn over a new leaf? Can we change relations in the Middle East permanently, or do we go back to doing things the old way, which is not our preference, but is certainly very much something that can happen. Vice President JD Vance budget stock June 21, 2026. He called the meeting historic, noting that never before had Iranian and American leadership met at such a senior level. He pointed to lower gasoline prices in the United States as a tangible, immediate benefit. And the result of the first round talks, the initial quadrilateral session lasted roughly 80 minutes. After that, both sides broke for internal consultation. A U.S. diplomat later told Axios that the parties had made, quote, good progress on keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. Iranian Foreign Minister Araki posted on social media that the had produced meeting has had produced major progress toward ending the Lebanon war and noted movement on oil exports, frozen assets, and reconstruction plans for Iran. Vance himself, speaking to reporters after the session, declared, "We have already made great progress over just the last few hours, and I expect that we will make additional progress in the hours to come." Um, a senior U.S. diplomat involved in the negotiations said the team anticipated working through the night. We have had robust discussions on all elements of the nuclear deal. The official talks are confirmed to continue Monday. Uh, but here's the truth about Burgeon stock progress. Uh, uh, Progress was made in spite of, not because of the surrounding circumstances, but there are three major fault lines that could crack this entire framework apart. Let's go through them one by one. On Saturday, very first of all, first fault line is the Strait of Hormuz crisis. On Saturday, just hours before Vance landed in Switzerland, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) made a dramatic announcement: the Strait of Hormuz was closed again. And the IRGC issued a stark warning to commercial vessels: do not approach the strait. They cited Israeli attacks on Lebanon and alleged American bad faith for failing to enforce a ceasefire as their justification. The announcement came almost simultaneously with a U.S. Central Command statement hailing the recent success of commercial traffic through the strait. 55 vessels had transited on Saturday alone, moving more than 17% barrel of oil. CENTCOM disputed Iran's claim. Vance himself said millions of barrels of oil had moved through the strait in recent days. The U.S. military said it was monitoring the situation and the traffic continued to flow. So, who controls the narrative around the world's most strategically sensitive waterway? That ambiguity is itself a form of Iranian leverage, and that leverage is not. Is not on the White House. Trump responded on Saturday with a truth social post threatening to impose U.S. tolls on ships passing through the state if no final uh, deal is reached within a 60-day window, billing it as payment for services rendered as the guardian angel to the countries of the Middle East. Lord Third Trump Trump threatened the Strait of Hormuz stalls if no deal in 60 days. It was an extraordinary statement, essentially the President of the United States threatening to tax global energy commerce. It underscores how both sides understand the strait to be the most immediate economic pressure point on these negotiations. Second fault line is Lebanon and the Hezbollah variable. Lebanon southern border Israeli positions and Hezbollah zones uh, are there. Iran has been crystal clear the Lebanon war uh, must end before any broader deal can be finalized. Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai said Sunday that because Washington had failed to guarantee a ceasefire in Lebanon, the initial meeting would focus primarily on that issue. Here is the fundamental problem. Neither Israel nor Hezbollah signed the U.S. Iran Memorandum of Understanding. They are not parties to this deal, and Israel, for its part, has said explicitly that it is not bound by the agreement. On Friday, an Israel Hezbollah ceasefire was announced within hours. Both sides accused the other of violation, and at least 16 people, including the civilians, were killed in Israeli strikes on Saturday. The cycle of attack and counter-attack continued, threatening to unravel the entire framework before the Swiss summit even began. The good news: as of Sunday, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon reported that for the very first time since hostilities began on March 2nd, peacekeeping forces had recorded no attacks from the either side, and an emergency session on Lebanon was added to the Virgin Stock agenda for Monday. Once acknowledge the complexity, these things are always a little bit messy. He said. He added that progress has been made on the Lebanon front, and stressed that the president has committed us to see a full regional ceasefire. But committing to a ceasefire and delivering one are very different things, particularly when a close American ally, Israel, is not at the negotiating table in Switzerland. Third fault line is nuclear enrichment, the hardest issue for Iranian side and for the United States side also. Iran nuclear program, which was according to 2015 JCPOA to 2026. And then there is the nuclear question, the most existential issue at the heart of these talks. negotiators want Iran locked into a verifiable commitment to curtail its nuclear program. They want IAEA inspectors, they want enrichment caps, they want transparency, and Iranian position stated by President Pezeshkian on Sunday morning is unequivocal. What is certain is that we will never back down from the right to enrich uranium, and the other side is also forced to accept it. And this is not a negotiating footnote. This is a red line delivered in public, on the record from the Iranian uh, head of state on the same day Vance was sitting down at the table. Republican headliners in Washington are already raising alarms. Trump and Vance have faced sharp criticism from within their own party, with some conservatives unfavorably comparing this framework to the 2015 JCPOA, the Obama-era nuclear agreement that Trump himself withdrew from in 2018, calling it the worst deal in American history. The irony is not lost on observers. The Trump administration that campaigned on maximum pressure against Iran is now the administration negotiating the most consequential diplomatic engagement with Tehran in a decade. The president and the vice president, two messages, one table. And now we come to the perhaps the most unusual diplomatic dynamic of the entire summit. As JD Vance sat at the negotiating table in Switzerland, President Trump was 5,000 miles away at Camp David, and he was not quiet. In a telephone interview with Fox News on Sunday morning, the network, whose Trey Yingst was on the ground in Switzerland, Trump issued warnings that would make any diplomats here stand on end. Um, Trump warned Iran's President Pezeshkian directly when told that the Iranian president had said Iran would maintain um, its right to enrich uranium. Trump responded as, according to him, better watch his mouth and better shape up, or we will take over the rest of the country. On the Strait of Hormuz, uh, Trump was Trump was even more visceral. He said that if Iran closes the strait, the U.S. will, and I am quoting Fox respondent Trey Young's direct report here, blows the out of them and close it if you won't have a country. Trump said you won't even make it back to your dash country. Trump is um, how pathetic statement given by the competent authority of the United States. Trump also described the memorandum of understanding and the framework his own administration negotiating and signed and as just an option, saying I can do whatever I want after that option. The Iranian response was immediate. Iran's chief negotiator, posted on X, "We don't count on the Americans' threats." He added pointedly, "Don't they think to themselves that if their threats had any effect, they would not have reached the point of desperation they are in today?" Iran's delegation formally expressed protest to the American side over Trump's comments, and Iranian officials warned that any form of threat is considered a serious violation of agreement. Vance, for his past part, tried to contain the damage. As he told reporters that Trump had asked us to turn over a new leaf, framing the president's threats not as contradictions but as a kind of background pressure. He played down tensions on Lebanon. He said, "I feel great about where we are." Um this is this is a well-known diplomatic tactic and the good cop, bad cop dynamic, but the negotiator on the ground offers partnership while the boss at the home telegraphs consequences. And but there is a real risk when the boss's threats are so explosive and so public, and they give the other side domestic political cover to walk away. Ghalibaf's response suggests Iran is perfectly content to use Trump's own words against the framework he signed. So, step back. What does all of this actually mean? Here is the analysis, and I want to be clear, this is not spin. This is an attempt to place today's events in honest strategic context. On what went right, the fact that these talks happened at all is not nothing. Direct senior level U.S. Iran engagement with both countries' officials in the same room has not occurred at this level in the modern era. The mere format of today's meeting represents a departure from uh, um, decades of decades of parallel and indirect communication. The 60-day framework provides a structured runway for negotiations. Oil markets have already responded positively if the Strait of Hormuz remains open and Lebanese hostilities stay quiet. They are real economic dividends for both sides. Uh, on what unresolved, if we discuss the other side of the picture, that is the central issues. Nuclear enrichment, Lebanon, Iran's frozen assets remain deeply contested. Iran's red lines on enrichment and America's red lines on nuclear weapons capability are not easily reconciled. The Lebanon variable is entirely outside a dynamic in which Iran can claim at any moment that America has violated the spirit of the MOU, providing justification for walking away. On the side of JD Vance, the vice president role in this summit is itself a story. He has been actively considering a 2028 presidential run. His presence here elevates the diplomatic profile and the political stakes of these negotiations considerably. A successful deal would hand Vance a foreign policy credential of historic magnitude. A collapse would be a headline he would carry into the next campaign. He has skin in his game that goes well beyond the current administration. The parallel of the parallels to the 2015 Obama era nuclear deal are real, and the political dynamics are fascinating. The same Republican coalition that destroyed joint JCPOA is now being asked to accept a framework that at its core involves similar trade-offs, sanctions relief in exchange for nuclear uh, for nuclear constraints, whether the Trump brand can sell a version of that deal to a skeptical GOP base is one of the most consequential political questions for coming weeks. Um, for the according to the bottom line, if I say 60 days, that is what the world has been given. 60 days to determine whether diplomacy can held where military force could not. The talks continue, the gaps remain wide, the pressure from all sides are enormous, but tonight, just tonight, the conversation is happening. uh, Here is what to watch for the hours ahead. That is Monday's emergency sessions, the stage, the Trump stone, and the nuclear language. So Monday's emergency session, in this point, a special session on Lebanon has been added to the burgeoning stock agenda. Whether a durable ceasefire can hold between Israel and Hezbollah may determine whether the entire framework survives the week. And secondly, the straight U.S. Central Command and Iran's IRGC are giving conflicting accounts of what is happening in the waterway right now. Watch for official shipping transit data from CENTCOM that will tell us the real picture. Then Trump's tone, any further public statements from the president that appear to threaten or undermine the talks will be watched closely in Tehran. Iran has already formally protested, and other rhetoric escalation could give Iran the pretext it needs to pause or exit. Then the nuclear language, any statement from either any statement from either uh, uh, about either side about enrichment caps, IAEA inspectors, or verification mechanisms will signal whether substantive progress is being made on the hardest issue, and we will bring you full coverage as events develop. Our correspondents remain on the ground at Stock, and so till then, for AFK Newsroom, take care of yourself and take care of your channel. And this is your own Dr. Ejaz. Stay blessed and keep smiling.